Very was the answer. As ammunition ran out and tanks struggled to punch their way to the inner core, the fighting devolved into hand-to-hand struggles. It was vile stuff, really. No finesse to it. Only an all-consuming desire to snuff out the life in front of you, to gouge out its eyes or pluck its windpipe free, then move on to the next one, just so you could keep moving. So why do it? Why care so deeply about this war, when in essence it was just like all the others? Archetta smiled to himself. Because names would be made here. After the guns had fallen silent at last, you had better be able to say that you had done something good, something worth boasting about when the Primarch finally stirred himself to making inquiries. There would be more fights to come, this time within the Legion, establishing who was up and who was down, so best to build a reputation while you had the chance. He dropped down to his knees for a moment, breathing hard. He was deep within the honeycomb debris piles of a demolished causeway. Its supporting pillars were still partially intact, rising 100 meters above him like exposed ribs. Cliff-face buildings reared away on either side, all smouldering. A pair of downed stormbirds framed his view ahead, their carcasses forming a triangular opening through which his brothers had been ordered to push on. The rattle and crack of bolter fire was everywhere still, though at a lower pitch of intensity than it had been as the magazines emptied. 500 energy weapons glimmered in the murk instead, their illumination guttering as their power units felt the strain of days-long usage. Archetta's own blade needed no such sustenance. It was hissing at him now, a low-frequency thirst for slaughter that he liked to hear. His senses were operating at their fullest pitch, his mind attuned to the targeting data streaming down his helm display. His brothers were filtering across the chasm floor, carved by the causeway's collapse, wary of potential sniper fire and ambush. Just getting here had been an achievement. They had cut their way through a full battalion of Blood Angels, supported by an Imperial Fists siege squad and the remains of an Imperial Army mobile infantry regiment. Those warriors must have been part of the Black Sword's offensive. They had fought with a kind of grim purpose he hadn't encountered until then. They weren't fighting for victory any longer, seeking to take and hold ground, but merely to deliver pain. They were bitter, nihilistic, spiteful and underhanded, and that was pretty admirable, all things considered. At least they weren't running away. All of that told Archetta that he was getting close. The cityscape was almost impossible to navigate now, a maze of roads sunk into drifting cloud banks of filmy soot, its outline features scoured away, so you had to trust your instincts. Those instincts told him the command group was up ahead. He had already dispatched flanking units out wide, moving into their familiar pincer formation, keeping in close contact as they jogged warily through the ruins. He started to move again. The risk was that his subordinates might flush the target out too well. He didn't even want them to wound him. It had to be a clean fight, one witnessed by his own kind, so that the story of his victory would stick. So he ran as fast as the terrain would allow, his squad brothers working hard to keep up. Hundreds of Sons of Horus fighters slipped like wraiths across the trash-clogged floor, hugging every scrap of cover, scanning furiously for movement signals or heat traces, even though they knew that in such conditions, with the air itself virtually on fire, they would be lucky to get anything. Once they cleared the oddly sculptural arrangement of burned-out stormbirds, the ground level ascended steeply, running up a wreckage pile that zigzagged towards the causeway's old terminus. The slope was overlooked on both sides, with high bridges crisscrossing overhead 100 meters up. As they advanced for the terminus, bolter fire immediately sprang out from hidden vantage points along the northern edge of the exposed run, striking a brace of Archetta's troops and forcing the rest to drop down. Archetta signalled a halt, falling to the dirt, then ran an auger sweep. It didn't give him much, but he knew the place would be riddled with defenders, maybe in the hundreds too. They would be buried in the dust, crouched under collapsed beams, clinging on to the floorless levels above, just waiting for something to try the gap. Forcing a push towards the terminus that way would be bloody and difficult, as would ordering squads to fight their way into the interior of the buildings on either side. Archetta signalled to his heavy support. "Clear this out!" Missile launchers set further back immediately whooshed out, followed by a percussive drumbeat of heavy bolter shells, obliterating the masonry wall the shooters hid behind. That familiar cushion of blown dust mushroomed across the expanse, filling the chasm from wall edge to wall edge. The barrage intensified, chewing through valuable ammunition but pulverizing the vista heads and forcing the collapse of a long rockcrete support pier. "Now take them!" As the thick dust still swelled up, Sons of Horus forward units burst out of cover and charged up the slope, using frag grenades to clear the route ahead before moving to secure ground. They went in low and fast, bodies tight to the ground as they ran before unleashing concentrated bolter fire at any sighted target. Archetta came with them, right in the vanguard, sprinting as fast as he could to make the next vantage, his bolt pistol kicking in his grip. The effect on the defenders was overwhelming, the kind of shock attack tactics the Legion had used throughout the Crusade. Hard to fight back when your surroundings had been blasted into powder around you. Except that they did fight back. Somehow they emerged out of the flying debris already firing. They were black-armored, all of them, multiple squads wading through the shrapnel and picking their targets. The air filled with the whistle and whine of 1,000 mass-reactive shells, followed by the clang and echoing crack of their detonations. Archetta swore, even as he leapt up from his cover and sliced through one of them with his sword. The edge kindled on the armor, flashing with a red-tinged flame before it cut deep. He punched the dying warrior away and pressed on, driving hard. They might be prepared to fight here, but they had neither the numbers nor the support to hold on for long. "Drive them back!" he cried, determined not to drop away into yet another holding pattern. He lashed out furiously, breaking the blade of another black-armored fighter and sending him tumbling, where a volley of shells finished him off. The Sons of Horus spear tip advanced swiftly, cutting and blasting its way up towards the summit of the rise. For all its ferocity, the defenders were too thin-spread now, unable to sustain this pitch of combat for long enough, outgunned and out-equipped. Archetta and his honor guard fought their way up to the terminus approaches, the secondary squads not far behind. His static fuzzed tactical display showed hundreds more of his troops racing into position, filtering up through the buildings around, flushing out the last resistance as they came. He reached the foot of metal stairs leading up to what had been the terminus command tower, flanked on either side by heavy rockcrete piers. The terrain around him was cluttered with machine parts, axles, wheels, tank tracks, all piled up like some conqueror's heap of skulls. Infernal winds raced overhead, blowing the dust into ever taller pillars, the howl of it masking the ongoing clamour of combat. But then, just before it happened, he realized what he had done. He got the warning tingle, like an electric field across his back, the old ganger instincts that had been with him long before his ascension. Before he could call out a warning, the heaps of machine parts were thrust aside and sent sailing down the slope, bounding and thudding. Dozens of loyalists erupted from underneath them. Some were blood angels by their pauldron marks, some were imperial fists, but the grime had made them all as black as soot, set into stark relief by the flares of their disruptors. Then the fighting really started. Archetta needed to give no orders. His vanguard hurled themselves at the enemy, pivoting instantly to take them on. Those coming on behind redoubled their efforts to reach the terminus, knowing that this was now in the balance. He dispatched the first enemy to reach him, slashing wildly with his hissing blade. Only as he moved to meet the next one did he see how far he'd come. The fighter before him was an Imperial fist, but arrayed in the coal-black armor of their Templar Brethren order. Something about his presence gave his identity away, even before he'd laid eyes on the sword itself. Something about the way he carried himself, his stature, his movements. Every figure around him unconsciously reacted to him, so that when he moved, they all moved too, like planets around a sun. His recklessly open stance might have been arrogant in any other fighter, but with him it merely fitted the aura he projected, one of complete and total focus, of immersion into the art of the blade to such an extent that no other way of being made any kind of sense at all. He strode across the wreckage in perfect silence, moving through it like a predator, his long sword eating up the meagre light and dragging it down into nothingness. Archetta felt a spike of joy. The black sword, he murmured, dropping into an attack stance, even as his own blade screamed with hatred. I did not expect to come across you so... He never saw the blow coming. It smacked in transverse, so strong, so fast, smashing through his guard and knocking his whole body out of line. And then the follow-up, liquid like oil, punching up, cutting in, unbelievably powerful. The hilt cracked against his helm, stunning him. Then a point-first ram of the blade, two-handed, a wrench, and blood was everywhere. The last thing he saw was a pair of red lenses swinging round at him, the ebon blade whistling for his neck, his parry nowhere near being close enough to... Sigismund gave the decapitated body a brief glance as it crashed to the earth. Before he could press on, Ran, having dispatched his own opponent, looked down at it too. "Captain," he noted, impressed. "Oh, though." By then Sigismund was marching down the slope to take on the rest. "No idea," he said. "Keep moving."